This is the Media Police Post from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because the truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and in the words of Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil. And for the most part, it is both evil and lazy. That is why the truth, their truth, must be put to a test. Two, another confirmed truth is that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground truth. And we will monitor columnists, we will assess the state of truth in what they submit to us, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists, we are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth, and it is a truth that sets you free. On today's show, we will discuss either our favorite columns of last week or columns which reflect unformed and uninformed opinions, and columns that made you stupid. These are columns that fell into the cognitive trap of we see things not as they are but as we are, or that are based on conjecture history, and lastly, ones that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome, Ms. K and CS. What will you be reviewing for us today?
Thank you. This week, I'd like to address a piece on the elephant titled "What Kenyans Have Always Wanted is to Limit the Powers of the Executive" by a gentleman called Ngala Chome. In the article, Mr. Chome takes us on a quick trip from tyranny of numbers to handshake to BBI. He says that Uhuru Kenyatta, pressured by opposition protests and a Supreme Court ruling that challenged his victory and ordered a rerun, met with Raila Odinga, his challenger for the presidency, in both 2013 and 2017 elections. Then he offered a settlement. It became known as the Building Bridges Initiative, or BBI. He then said that the president, in his 2020 Jamhuri Day speech, reiterated that the purpose, and I repeat, the word purpose is underlined in the article, of the BBI process is to abolish the winner-take-all system by expanding the executive branch of government. The challenge to Kenya's politics is the politicization of ethnicity, coupled with a lack of requisite number of political offices within the executive branch that would satisfy all ethnic constituencies. Again, borrowed from the words of the president. So Mr. Chome then again repeats the question asked by DP William RUTO when he asked, does the establishment of the positions of Prime Minister, two Deputy Prime Ministers create the much sought after inclusivity? Then borrowing again from the president, Mr. Chome, and I repeat, this is a very repetitive article, in his response in Jamhuri Day speech said that the BBI also proposes the positions of leader of opposition with a shadow cabinet and technical support and a budget. That would mean that the loser of the presidential election would still have a role to play in governance. Then he says that the 2010 constitution is a pure presidential system that doesn't anticipate any formal political role for the loser or losers of a presidential election. And he says, rightfully so, that Raila Odinga held no public office between 2013 and 2017. Yet, according to him, Raila won more gubernatorial posts across the 47 counties than the ruling Jubilee Alliance in the 2013 elections. To be honest, I think that Raila, Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Wetangula, and Kalonzo Musyoka would have greatly benefited if the office of official opposition was in existence. But then Mr. Chome, after a summary analysis of our independence constitution, the amendments that were made to it to abolish the Majimbo system, as well as the distribution of powers and responsibilities, well, money-wise, that were percolated down to the counties, he says that by 2010, there was not a meaningful decentralized system of government. The executive and the presidency at its head continued to survive at attempts at limiting their powers. For him, and this is how he ends the article, he says that the more things changed as far as the proposals made in the BBI, the more they stayed the same. So on his article, I would like to say two things. The first is on inclusion. And I say that political inclusion is vital to a sustainable democracy. So substantial evidence, and we can look at our own 2007 elections, substantial evidence points to the fact that exclusion of marginalized and minority groups from political decision-making is a key factor in both political and civil conflict and instability, which in turn affects democratic transitions or consolidations. Just look back again at our 2007 elections as our own version of proof. The second thing I'd like to say is on the fragility of democracy. The democratic experiment is a process, and just like parenting, don't expect to get it 100% right the first time. For instance, the Republican model of democracy practiced in France has been abandoned twice and readopted twice. The current French constitution is executed under what is known as the Fifth Republic. Even America's democracy has been put to a severe test in the last 5 years by both Trump's victory, 50% of the country under Hillary Clinton was like, what happened? And his loss. We have set, and I think we are doing this, we have set a very high bar for ourselves when we expect a perfect Kenyan version of an ongoing global experiment in democratic rule. Let us not be afraid to tinker with it until it suits our unique reality. Besides, if it doesn't work, we could just amend it.
Try and try again.
I agree.
I like that.
I like what you said about let us not be afraid to tinker with it. Here's a fun fact. The Mexicans have amended their constitution over 100 times.
Wow.
And that does not even include alterations.
And here we're just looking to amend the first time since 2010.
Since 2010. This week, I shine a light on an article which appeared in The Nation this past Saturday, and that gave a brief account of the salvos and verbal blows between the former Prime Minister and the current Deputy President. If the things that are reported are true, then there are certain conversations that we simply must have as a nation. The article informs us that Dr. RUTO accused Mr. Odinga of derailing the government from its development agenda, and that he came and changed the government's priorities from the Big Four to BBI, and that has failed miserably, and he now wants to run away. The Deputy President of this Republic of Kenya is also quoted as stating that they pushed their way into government and took over the running of government, and they now want to run away from their failure. Words are important, especially when they come from someone who is a heartbeat away from the presidency. Here we are being told that the government's priorities were changed after the handshake, and that there have been failures as a result. Now, if we are to ask, who sets the government's priorities and the government's agenda? Is it not the presidency, which consists of the president and the deputy president? Yet somehow, we're to believe that the deputy president has no part to play in all this, because he says that, and I quote, they pushed their way into government and took over the running of government, and that 3 years down the line, they have failed miserably. The Deputy President of the Republic is telling us that for 3 years, he has not been part of controlling a government that he now says has been failing. And yet, the President, on the 9th of January, with unwavering conviction, told us that he's both in charge and in control of government. And the utterances by the President and the Deputy President were made just 2 weeks apart. Shortly after the President assured us he is in control, the DP has now sensationally claimed that they run us out of government and it has been taken over, in what we are to understand is a civilian coup. If we are to believe that the Deputy President has substantively not been part of running the country for 3 years, if he is telling us that he abdicated his duties and could not defend that which he promised to defend, if he is saying to us that he has been and now is a nominal Deputy President, then he must do the last honorable thing that there is to do, and that is to resign. Secondly, if the nominal deputy president is now saying the presidency is not in control and that it has the wrong priorities, that it has been taken over, then the deputy president has effectively registered a vote of no confidence in the president and in the government we thought he was serving for those 3 years. Looking back into history, let us visit April 14th, 1966. One of our nation's founding fathers, then Vice President Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, penned a letter to then President Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. Standing on principle, the Vice President then admitted that his conscience pricked him, and that he feared that future generations would question his sincerity if they learned that he continued to hold the position of Vice President, earning public money amidst poverty and misery when essentially he had no work to do. He was saying that he could not, in good conscience, remain in office as a nominal Vice President. Fellow Kenyans, a precedent was set. If we have had a nominal deputy president for 3 years, the time is long overdue for the needful to be done. But before we rest this case, let us also say that if two people are saying two very different things on the same subject, then one of them is lying. It was sensationally claimed that the Big Four agenda was derailed. Let us briefly examine some facts. By 2020, manufacturing output in Kenya had increased to 2.6 trillion Kenyan shillings. And manufacturing is one of the 4 pillars of the Big Four. And by 2020, it was also manufacturing which took the lead in wage employment. And to further continue supporting this growth, the government set aside 172 billion for infrastructure to support industries. That to me sounds like a priority. One more example. In the 2020-2021 budget, 15.5 billion Kenya shillings was allocated to housing, urban development, and the public sector. Again, affordable housing is one of the pillars of the Big Four. That sounds to me like a priority. Lastly, let us remember that a big part of the premise of the handshake is the principle that you cannot have economic development without political stability. Government has clearly continued on its development trajectory contrary to the deputy president's propaganda. Ladies and gentlemen, insubordination in the highest organ of our government, the presidency, is a threat to national security and political stability. Either the deputy president should resign, or it is now incumbent on our leaders in parliament to remove the DP from high office, and to do so expeditiously in the national interest. Let me end by quoting the late Professor George Saitoti. And I believe the DP was there when these infamous words were uttered in 2002. There come a time when the nation is more important than an individual.
Indeed, strong words there.
Very, very strong words.
And you know what? Without the handshake, we would still be on tear gas Mondays.
I do agree. And I think like our president is doing what is called the politics of friendship. And this is borrowed from the works of Aristotle, who says that, and he defines the politics of friendship as an agreement that is mutually beneficial, mutually pleasurable, or derived from a shared concern for goods. It is mutually beneficial to both of them, I must say that. And it is mutually pleasurable. We don't have tear gas Mondays anymore. But also it is for a concern for shared goods. If we did not stop all of that drama that kept on playing out in our political sphere, then we would not have had time to develop.
And what we would have had instead is mutually assured destruction.
Exactly.
Zero-sum game. This week, I look at an article from yesterday's Sunday Star by Wycliffe Muga, where he tells us that Central Kenya's resistance to Uhuru is a repeat of history. He profiles how the people of Central Kenya are very independent-minded and their support can't be taken for granted. Muga takes us on a beautiful historical journey of how Gema Nation has played out its politics. It took me back actually to a quote by Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. He rightly points out that outside of central Kenya, there's a tendency to think of the Kikuyu community as the most united vote bloc in the country, and one that can be relied on to support their recognized Muthamaki, their supreme leader, in all his political initiatives. Muga is absolutely astute in noting that the people of that region are actually very independent-minded and that their support cannot indeed be taken for granted by a serving president of Kikuyu ethnicity, in this case, Uhuru Kenyatta. He quotes extensively from the autobiography of the late Jaramogi Odinga, titled Not Yet Uhuru, and here Muga highlights details of what happened when Jaramogi demanded that Jomo and his fellow detainees be released. He describes how Central Kenya loyalists such as Dr. Kano and Jeremiah Nyaga were not all that enthusiastic about Jomo. And this dissent was from who Muga describes as arguably two of the finest politicians ever produced by Central Kenya, and political giants in their own right. But they deserted Jomo in his hour of need. So as Uhuru faces the sunset of his last term, as he continues this legacy of handshakes and unity, we see that just like his father Jomo, he is facing much of the same skepticism and turmoil that Jomo must have faced in 1958 while in detention. Muga gives the historical example of the 1992 election. He says that the prospect of putting an end to the Moi presidency did not produce political unanimity among the Kikuyu voters. Instead, they had two strong presidential candidates in Kenneth Matiba and Mwai Kibaki, candidates whose total vote tally in the end easily exceeded that of President Moi. But being thus divided allowed the incumbent to prevail. And this is an example of Gamba short-sightedness. I would have gone perhaps a step further in history and chronicled the 1976 Change the Constitution movement. And this was led by the infamous Kiambu Mafia in a bid to stop Moi from being Jomo's successor. The book Kenyatta Succession by Joseph Karemi and Philip Ocheng is useful in showing how a section of people can be easily and dangerously used as cogs in a wheel of somebody's own personal drive for power. And it reminded me of the current Hustler Nation narrative, of how crude and divisive politics can be. So as we approach 2022, the House of Gemma, in particular the Agikoyo, must not reduce the political atmosphere and the struggle for power to a contest between themselves and the rest of Kenya. I think the main lesson for Gemma that they can draw from history is that you cannot go it alone. And Muga tells us just that in the article. He says that Jomo may well have had a good part of the Central Kenya grassroots solidly behind him, but he did not have the unquestioning loyalty of the Central Kenya elite. Thus, it was only through the support of Jaramogi, a man who commanded his unwavering support from his corner of Nyanza, that Jomo was in due course able to restore himself firmly as a leader of the struggle for independence. And this is why the handshake had to be done. Uhuru's realization that he has to reach beyond the Kikuyus. And in the run-up again to 2022, I believe that there must be a realization that it doesn't pay it to be too trusting in politics. So let me leave you with a story. Once upon a time, there was a snake chased by hunters, and it came across a farmer and asked the farmer to save his life. So to hide it from its pursuers, the farmer squatted and let the snake crawl into his belly. But when danger had passed and the farmer asked the snake to come out, the snake refused, for it was warm and safe inside the farmer's belly. On his way home, the farmer saw a heron and went up to him and to whisper what had just happened. The heron told him to squat and eject the snake. When the snake stuck its head out, the heron caught it, pulled it out, and killed it. The farmer was worried that the snake's poison might still be inside him, and the heron told him that the cure for the snake poison was to cook and eat 6 white fowl. "You're a white fowl," the farmer said. "Well, you'll do for a start." So he grabbed the heron, put it in a bag, and carried it home, where he hung it up while he told his wife what had happened. "I'm surprised at you," said the wife. "The bird does you a kindness. It saves your life, in fact, yet you catch it and talk of killing it." So she immediately releases the heron and it flew away. But before it left, it gouged her eyes out. Lesson here perhaps, not everyone or everything should be trusted at first glance. In other words, never to put too much trust in people, and also learn how to use your enemies.
Interesting story.
Thank you.
And what you said about history rhyming reminds me of something that was once said by the Roman senator Cicero.
Yes.
That those who do not know what came before them will forever remain children.
Yeah.
And I think it is the apostle St. Paul who tells us that there comes a time when we must now put away childish things.
Of course.
That is true.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Media Police Post for columnists. Join us next week. Kindly hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Pan Free to Air, and Star Times.